From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Rob Casper. I'm the head of the Poetry and Literature Center at the Library of Congress, and I want to welcome you to our event, Lit in Conversation, the first in our series. This series aims to bring writers of different genres, as well as artists of other disciplines, together to discuss how their work jointly deepens our experience of the world. First of all, I would like to thank our library co-sponsors, the Hispanic Division and the Center for the Book, for working with us. And I'd like to put out a special thanks to Catalina Gomez for her help in this afternoon's event. I also want to thank Letras, Latinas, and especially Francisco Aragon, who expertly moderated our panel this afternoon. He really dreamed up this event and help make it happen with the support of both Letras Latinas and the University of Arizona Press. If you can, please follow my lead and turn off your cell phones or any other electronic devices that you might have. Let me also take this opportunity to tell you about the Poetry and Literature Center at the Library of Congress. For the past 75 years, we have been home to the consultant in poetry, now called the Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry. Our current poet laureate is Philip Levine. We also put on literary readings, lectures, and panels of all sorts throughout the year. If you would like to find out more about events like this, please pick up one of our selected events calendars outside, and there's also a sign-up sheet outside too. The table outside also has books by both of our authors, and I'm sure they would be happy to sign them afterwards, and their anthology, The Other Latino, Writing Against a Singular Identity. Our two readers tonight, Blas Falconer and Lorraine Lopez, gave a brilliant reading today from that anthology, and they followed with an equally brilliant moderated discussion. If you were not lucky enough to see this event, you will be able to catch it online as a webcast. You can visit www.com/poetry or visit the Letras Latinas website, which is www.letraslatinas.com. It should be up, both this event and our Books and Beyond event from noon in the coming months. Tonight, however, we celebrate Falconer and Lopez as writers. You can read about them both a little bit in your printed program. They will read in alphabetical order, and I will follow with both in a moderated discussion, which is the basis for the Lit in Conversation title. Finally, we will open the floor to your questions. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Blas Falconer and Lorraine Lopez.
Thanks, Rob and Francisco, and everyone who was involved in making this happen. I'm having a great time. I'm going to read for about 15 minutes. So I'm just going to read 4 poems from my first book and then 4 poems from my second book, which will be coming out in October. The first poem I'm going to read, I chose this one because I spoke about it earlier in the 12 o'clock discussion and in my essay from the Other Latino. The Given Account, Puerto Rico, 1510. Oh, and I should say this is inspired by the first documented murder on the island of Puerto Rico, murder of a Spaniard on the island of Puerto Rico. They said they were gods, and we believed. They crossed uncrossable seas after all, in ships with sails like wings. But Salcedo is dead, pacing river shallows, turning rocks, sifting sand for flecks of gold. He cut his foot on stone or shell, sending braids of blood downstream. Overhead, wind shook trees, so leaves and light spilled in, catching a school of fish, a silver shimmer. I was there. Kneeling on the bank, I dressed his wound, pressing strips of cloth to stop the flood. But red spots seeped through the weave, my fingers wet with blood, his blood, no different from mine. He winced, his face paled by pain, but nothing changed. No dove, no cloud, no beam of light, and he a god or son of God? I, who came to drink, struck dumb by one thought, they bleed, they die, led him back into the pool and pushed his head below. His arms thrashed, legs kicked, lungs inhaled, mouths of water. He stopped. 3 days I stayed to see him stir, but he, not strongest, weakest, or cruelest of them, did not move. I pulled him out. He hung wet and limp and heavy in my arms. This man, almost too much to bear. A definition of terms. 1, cruise, as in, I didn't plan to cruise anyone. A verb, slang, to seek a trick, usually at night. No connection to Tom Cruise, beloved actor and movie star. 2, trick, a noun, slang, aka good love, one-night stand. A verb, to have sex with someone of the same or opposite sex, the number of which often accrues with increased loneliness and lack of love. That's what we became, 2 potential tricks that morning at the airport, co-stars in some fantasy, the story of 2 strangers, their flights delayed, waiting to board their planes. You watched me, you, a sexy Spaniard dressed in white. Save the all-star tennis shoes, nice touch. Bored, I watched planes cruise the runway, drew the same geometric shape in my book, circle, circle. But I love the fear that comes with desire, and I love to be desired. So though I thought, no, it's too early, not a chance, I'm too tired to trick, and where the hell would we have sex anyway? Before long, I was the one cruising you, the idea of us a fleck of light, a star growing brighter. I walked past you, staring at you with a smile as if to say, I'd love to get it on. Passengers and flight crews, too busy fighting or sleeping or gabbing to see what we were up to, see us talking sex without talking. You followed me, we tricked them all. An hour later, I'm alone. My plane tricks the pull of gravity, taking me home, starward, as the ground grows and grows. The sex was great, a bathroom stall, a soft love grip, buckles, buttons, goodbye kiss, all too fast to forget, tender to confuse. 1, to cruise, to seek comfort in a body. 2, trick, the cruised, the lonely, the starved, sex between strangers who give and take this temporary love. Whenever I read that poem, I'm always a little embarrassed because I'm always afraid that people are going to think that I have a crush on Tom Cruise. Not there. Not there. The sun is everywhere, but my neighbor doesn't mind. She kneels in the flower bed, a floppy hat, a small shovel in her gloved hand. When she stops, she leans in the door to catch her breath, her head bare and bald. Once, my mother held her breast to show us where they cut the tenderness away. She sank into a pillow and fell asleep, but I looked around the room for something that wasn't there, which is what she wanted us to see, the not there, a black star stitched over the heart. Like the bird that broke her neck against the window, Her wings, green and iridescent, were beautiful and useless. The joints moved like the links of a chain, a bracelet or necklace draped across my fingertips, and bile spilled from her beak. Until then, I thought she might live. I often know when the dog is at the door, before he barks, and when I call, my mother always says, "I was thinking of you." At dusk, the neighbor's husband waters the ground beneath the blossoms, but he doesn't do it for them. A dark grows over the street as it begins to rain, as it begins to pool and flood. Another day ends. Every morning, down the hill, the hammers bang for hours, and treetops sway. Soon enough, we'll see what they've been building all along. The Battle of Nashville. Snow gives the sky a new dimension, depth, a soft glow, as if the air lit the yard which slopes to the city, which shimmers. The river is always moving, but the atrium on Fifth, the crest where blacks locked arms and would not budge. A plow takes the hill, where cars line up in rows and half-built lofts replace the houses. The man who built our house built diesel engines and kept the trucks he couldn't fix. His daughter sold it all, except the how-to books, the shop van he left in the attic. We're not brave, but we find each other in bed at night, your hand or my hand reaching out. In the morning, you take the trash, I make the coffee. Nearby, battles were fought, and men whose wives waited for them died. If soldiers held the highest ground, one stood here. If there is one, there is at least one more. Standing shoulder to shoulder, they share a blanket as snow settles in the trees. I think they are afraid. I think this is love. So now I'm going to read 4 poems from my new book, which is coming, as I said, coming out in October, and it's all inspired, or mostly inspired by my son's adoption in 2008. The Annunciation. Whether she lifts a hand to her breast in protest or surprise, I can't say, though we know how it ends. He reaches out as if to keep her there, her fingers on the open book of prayer or song, the cloth draped across her waist. Faith, he might have said, as the cells of disbelief began to multiply, a son who'd face great pain, certain death. In one account she fled. He chased her back into the house, not Gabriel, a pull inside the ribs, until she acquiesced, exchanging one loss for another. X-rays expose a sign of someone else's brush. Experts doubt the dress or wings are his, but claim the sleeve, the buttoned cuff, a triumph, young as the artist was, not having found perspective, the vanishing point too high, one hand too large, the flaw in her face, a lack of fear or awe. A warm day in winter. The leash looped around my wrist. We stopped to let the dog piss across a trunk. The branches stark this late in winter, though everyone is out, spreading blankets on the grass, eating with plastic forks. We amble across the park without purpose or direction, our wheels pausing at stick and stone before we jostle on. Your eyes attuned to every first, fixed upon the few leaves above, withered but holding. You flail your fists at the small sky, the brief light it carries. Tomorrow, the cold will rush back into the city, and neither you nor the dog will understand or remember, though you might respond cheerfully, not knowing why, when we return one day in spring. I try to see as you, without likeness or memory, as I did the night that you were born. Before, I couldn't guess your complexion, the color of your eyes, the mark that spread across your back like a map of the world. I told myself it was because you didn't come from me, but Mother says it was the same for her. At once, the thought became the form, as in the myth, the woman springs from her father's head, your face determined in its particulars, the forehead's frown beneath lamps that kept you warm, the hoarse cry as you expelled the first breaths of air. So in my arms at last, I didn't know you, but looked in wonder all the same, noting how little you weighed. You will not recall any of this, of course, which seems a shame when you are older, how I fed you through the late hours in a room sterile and cold, but for paintings of landscapes much like this one, or how we walked along the row of trees, avoiding roots that surfaced, and stopped a while beneath an elm on a warm December day. There is a kind of narrative arc for this manuscript, and I kind of have to explain the next poem briefly. A few months after, about a month and a half after we adopted our son, my partner's father passed away, and so he never got to meet, his father never got to meet our son, and so this is kind of in reference to that. It's called Attic. The dimmest light is the only light that works. The brass bed frame against the wall, the dresser drawer full of knobs. The sound of fan blades and the vent wheel is the sound of a nest above the still air. You hesitate over the heap of your inheritance. The way you close your eyes to feel your way around a room at night is how you might miss someone. Forget what you are looking for. The lamp's beaded pull is the sound of the dark in your hand. And I will finish with one last poem titled Lighter. Thank you so much for listening. And again, thanks to Rob and Francisco. Lighter. The word that comes to mind after many nights, as when a plane descends over a city you call home, the bodies rise against the belts strung across your lap. Darkness and lampposts, like gold and silver beads below, falling into them, or better yet, wading in the bioluminescent bay, and each kick creates a soft glow, each stroke makes you think light could come from the body and not a world disturbed into brilliance. Because it captures what I mean, both the weight and how you see what you could not, as when I heard him cry and lumbered down the hall to find you there first, pacing the room, singing softly in his ear. Through the window, the city sparkled and seemed to have grown, though by day I never see more than 2 or 3 men working at once, lifting together, say, a plank of wood. Years ago, my mother sat beside my bed, eager to bear the fever with me. We pass him back and forth between us till it breaks, and I no longer want what I wanted before, as when one day you look upon the house you've built and can't recall the field. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here tonight, and thanks to all who were responsible for organizing this event. I'm very proud and privileged to be here. I'm going to read from 2 of my books. One is a short story collection, Homicide Survivors Picnic, and the other is my latest novel, Realm of Hungry Spirits. So I think I need to let you know a little bit about this piece, this story that I'm going to be reading from. It's called The Thread of Peace, and it's broken into sections with subtitles that are mediation terms that mediators use. And the characters here are Stuart, who's a mediator, Guadalupe, who's his girlfriend he's living with. She's just been served Rule Nisi earlier in the day by her ex-husband, and Delia, her daughter. The section I'm going to begin with is called Conflict Style. As Stuart washes the dishes, Guadalupe whisks egg whites for a Swiss cheese soufflé. On rare occasions, inspiration strikes, and Guadalupe pulls out her Julia Child cookbook to break the monotony of broiled chicken or fish and salads she prepares night after night. She's well into her second gin and tonic and whipping the frothy mixture in a fury, as though Anders, her ex-husband, himself, miniaturized and helpless, is trapped in the bowl. Her cheeks are flushed, her jaw clenched, and now and again Stuart overhears her muttering curses in Spanish. Stuart has never known anyone like Guadalupe when it comes to facing opposition, and he has a chart he uses for training others in mediation that describes how people react to conflict, a continuum ranging from positive to negative in 3 categories: evasion, confrontation, and aggression. None of these adequately describe Guadalupe's response, which is close to pure exhilaration. She is invigorated, nearly gleeful, in the face of challenges that most others would shrink from. Guadalupe doesn't just embrace conflict, she seems to want to make out with it. The letter from Anders' attorney has infused her with the energy to embark on the soufflé. As she's folding the egg whites into the batter and Stuart is drying the flatware, the front doorbell rings. They both freeze. Most visitors come to the side of the house, through the carport to the kitchen door. Only strangers ring the front doorbell. Probably just some Jehovah's Witness. Stuart tosses the dish towel over the rack to dry. I'll see who's there. More bad news, I bet. Guadalupe arches her brow as if to say, bring it on. They use the front entryway so infrequently that Stuart can't open it right away. Just a minute, he shouts through the thick door, fumbling for the lock, to unlock the door. After a few tries, he fits the right key into the lock and opens the door to a stout young man in a sheriff's deputy uniform. Anders? Guadalupe? The deputy reads from his clipboard, pronouncing the name as though it is a ride at a Christian-themed amusement park. Guadalupe, Stuart says. Guadalupe Apodaca. Apodaca, the deputy, whose pale freckles and deep-set pebbly eyes are vaguely familiar to Stuart, flips through the pages affixed on his clipboard. Apodaca. She's divorcing and taking back her maiden name. Why Guadalupe, with her track record, bothers to change it each time is a mystery to Stuart. Well, I need to see this person. The deputy holds his clipboard for Stuart to see through the screen door. The top page is a photocopy for a check for $15.20 to ABC Liquors, which is signed by Guadalupe Anders. It's drawn on the joint account she had with Anders and stamped account closed. Stuart's stomach lurches. Since summer, he's struggled to bring Guadalupe's chaotic finances under control. He's met with bank managers and spoken to creditors on the telephone, negotiating manageable terms for balancing her various overdrawn accounts and refinancing her high-interest loans. Somehow, he missed this one. And he has the sickening feeling that this is more serious than it looks, but he keeps his tone light. Oh, that, he says. You see, officer, Ms. Apodaca was married to Mr. Anders. Their divorce is nearly finalized now, but when they first separated, Mr. Anders emptied their joint accounts without telling Ms. Apodaca. Stuart hopes this is the truth or something near the truth. The check is dated July, around the time they separated. I can't discuss this with you, sir, the deputy says. I need to see the person named here. Stuart scratches his head. I'm afraid you've just missed her. But Guadalupe has crept up behind him. What's this about? Are you Ms. He shows the check again. Did you write this check? Guadalupe slips in front of Stuart for a better look. Yes, I did. It was returned from the bank. Account closed, the deputy says. Oh, no problem, Guadalupe says. Just let me get my purse. I'm sorry, ma'am. It's too late for that. Stewart's hands buzz and his ears burn as though he has drawn the bad check. He knows what's coming, though he says, "We're prepared to pay any fine or late fee. I'm sorry, but I have to arrest you, ma'am, and take you down to the station for booking." The deputy purses his colorless lips, shakes his head. "But you can't," Guadalupe says in a hot, gin-fueled burst. "I never even got the letter. I always pay my overdrawn checks when I get my letter." "They don't have to send you a letter, ma'am, if the account is closed." "Anders," Guadalupe says, "that jackass." "I'm sure we can work this out," Stewart says, suspecting there is no way short of bribing an officer of the law. "And you don't have to arrest Miss Apodaca. If we put our heads together, I'm certain we can come up with something." "No, sir. I'm afraid that's not possible." Guadalupe's teenage daughter Delia appears in the hallway, her cell phone to her ear, and a cross look on her smooth oval face. "What's going on?" "I'm being arrested," Guadalupe says. "No way," Delia says, her velvety eyes sparking. "I gotta go," she says into the phone. "My mom's getting arrested." Delia snaps the phone shut and pushes past Stewart to link arms with Guadalupe. "You can't arrest my mom." "Two ways we can do this," the deputy says, reaching now for his handcuffs. "Officer," Stewart says, "you know this is a mistake. We can work it out. You can get in your own car, ma'am, and follow me to the station." "But I can't be arrested," Guadalupe says, shaking her head. Delia, still clinging to her mother, begins sobbing. "Or I can cuff you and take you in the squad car." He's holding the stainless steel bracelets now. "We'll follow you," Stewart says. "Just give us a minute." Guadalupe pats her daughter's arm, murmurs in her ear. Then she turns to Stewart, her brow knitted, her large eyes narrowed, blinking with incomprehension. "How can I be arrested," she glances toward the kitchen, "when I'm making a souffle?" And then I want to read a brief passage from Realm of Hungry Spirits. And I think to set this up, the main character is Marina Lucero. She's kind of on a quest for spirituality, but has no aptitude for it. And she's a teacher who's called into the principal's office. She is just, the person of interest is Carlos Lozano, who is a substitute for her. And he's just a very fascinating person to her because he's a Buddhist, and she's on this quest for spirituality. And he's an artist as well, so she's very interested in him. And after he is substituted for her class, she's called in to talk to the principal. And the administrative manager of the school is named Dee, and she's the one who calls her in. The school's administrative manager, Dee, catches my eye. "Marina," she calls from her desk at the heart of the reception area, "the principal would like a word with you." I glance at my watch. Now?" "Yes, if you have a moment." Dee's this lean, tough blonde in her 50s. Her leathery face suggests she's spent way too much time in the sun, but I can't picture this vigorous woman doing anything as relaxing as sunbathing. She likely chops down trees or does construction work in her spare time. She never bothers with makeup to hide the fact of her age or to cover the sun's damage to her skin. Truth be told, she's scarier to me than the principal, and certainly more powerful, especially to those of us who need school supplies, textbooks, and that monthly paycheck. So if you have a moment comes across like, "You bet your ass I mean now." Without waiting for my answer, Dee lifts the inter-office phone and says, "She's on her way, Mrs. Jimenez." As I make my way toward the inner office, I scroll through my memory for anything I might have done to get called into the principal's office, which I have discovered is far worse for teachers than students. Maybe despite my most conscientious efforts, I have cursed audibly, or more likely I've forgotten to complete some essential paperwork. There are so many mistakes to make, I'm not even sure I would know if I had made one. I tap lightly on the inner office door, and it swings wide almost instantaneously, as if Mrs. Jimenez has been standing there waiting, her hand poised near the doorknob. "Come in, Marina," she says with a smile. "Take a seat." A thick cloud of jasmine and musk, an expensive-smelling scent, rolls out and envelops me as I step into the principal's cool, dark office. With the heavy wooden furniture, leather-upholstered chairs, and framed prints of classic cars on the walls, this always strikes me as a man's office, but Mrs. Jimenez is a short, dainty woman, not too much older than me. Soft curls frame her round face, and she sports a deceptively warm, deep-dimpled grin. But I've heard from other teachers that she can be an absolute and heartless dictator, capable of exiling anyone who crosses her to teach in the juvenile detention centers with just a snap of her well-manicured fingers. Dee mentioned that you wanted to see me, I say. Yes, she says. She circles the desk to take her seat and indicates I should sit in the chair opposite hers. I wanted to ask you about your experiences with a substitute teacher we've been considering for a long-term assignment. She rifles through a file sleeve on her desk. His name is Carlos Lozano, and I believe he covered for you yesterday. That's right, I say, shifting a nalga to get more comfortable in the rock-hard chair she offered me. You see, I had a family emergency. With a flick of a wrist, she waves this off, not important. How did he do? Any problems? No, he was fine. He's an art teacher, and we happened to be doing a culminating project that involved crafts, so another wrist flick. The reason I ask is that he was hired by the vice principal to paint a mural in her guest room, and, well, Ms. Myers had a questionable experience with him. Questionable? My heart feels larger, heavier, throbbing thickly in my chest. Ms. Myers lives out in Saugus, you know, the boonies, as we say, and she has a field in back of her house where she and her husband grow corn. Corn, I say, as if inexplicably succumbing to echolalia. My stomach twists in expectation of disappointment, even disgust. And I'm also thinking, why corn? Isn't it enough to be an administrator? Does Myers have to be a farmer too? Already I resent her for her corn, and whatever trouble it may have caused Carlos. Yes, corn. They grow corn. Mrs. Jimenez nods, an uncomprehending look on her face, as if she, too, has no idea why anyone would deliberately choose to grow corn. She says that Carlos did an exquisite room on the guest room. The mural is more than she and her husband expected. According to her, it's beautiful and tasteful and so forth. But after painting the thing, Carlos asked if he could look around outdoors. Miss Myers agreed. How could she not, after he'd done such a good job? I shake my head. No way could she have turned him down. Well, while Carlos was taking a look around, that last phrase Mrs. Jimenez not only inflects, but she also applies air quotes. Ms. Myers prepared some lemonade for him. It was a hot afternoon, humid and so forth, so she thought it would make a nice treat. But Mrs. Jimenez leans forward on her elbows to study my face before she releases the next bit of information. When Ms. Myers peered out the window to find Carlos, to call him in for the lemonade, she discovered, well, she happened to see, this is difficult to say. What? What did she see? What? I'm now perched on that cement-like cushion, leaning forward myself and straining to imagine what on earth the woman saw. A satanic ritual? No, it would have to be something to do with Buddhism. A bizarre lotus pose? What? She looked out the window and she caught Mr. Lozano running naked through her cornfield. Running naked? I nearly gasp, but my shock is more from the buildup of suspense and the absurdity of the thing. Precisely, Mrs. Jimenez settles back into her chair, a satisfied look on her pretty face. He had taken off all of his clothes to run through the corn stalks in the nude. Well, if it was a hot day, I struggle to imagine the context for Carlos to shed his clothing and run through the corn. It was hot. Mrs. Jimenez concedes this, nodding her head so vigorously that she seems to be rocking herself in her seat. I mean, is it illegal? Mrs. Jimenez shrugs, watching me intently. Is he a friend of yours? Weirdly, I think of my neighbor's old rooster, the one who became soup. How he would crow 3 times each morning and then pause, waiting until I fell back asleep before starting in again. I can almost hear those first 3 protracted shrieks before I speak. I haven't known him long, so I wouldn't say he's a friend. He seems like a fine person, and he did a good job covering my class. I just wanted to be sure he isn't a friend of yours. Mrs. Jimenez lifts a pen from its stand and examines the tip. You see, we can't possibly offer him a long-term position under these circumstances. And in fact, we really can't invite him back to substitute for any of our teachers. It's too much of a risk for us, for our students. I just wanted you to understand that. I nod, but I wonder what she means by risk. How is a man who takes off his clothes to run through a cornfield any kind of risk to anyone but himself and a few corn stalks if he should trample on these? And what business does Miss Myers have growing corn when you can get it for practically nothing at the supermarket? There's something about growing corn in Southern California that's more suspicious than being nude outdoors. But I say, is she really sure that's what she saw? I mean, sometimes men take their shirts off, and if the corn is high, maybe he was wearing flesh-tone jogging shorts. Just how would she even know for sure? She saw, Mrs. Jimenez says. Everything. She knows. Then the principal rises from her seat. Thanks for taking the time to see me, Marina. I hope I haven't kept you from lunch. I glance at my watch, scramble to gather up my book bag and purse, and stand on numb and buzzing legs. I just don't get it, I say. I mean, it's so strange. But we're not going to have a problem with this, are we, Marina? I shake my head and follow her to the door, which she opens to usher me out. Good, and thanks again for meeting with me. With a cool and fragrant gust, she softly clicks the door shut behind me. Thank you.
Thanks to you both for a terrific and varied reading. It was fun to listen to you read, not only to think about the ways in which poems and stories work differently, but also just to see how different the two of you could be in your in this sort of worlds you create and your tones. But let me just start by raising a question related to our afternoon reading and conversation. You're both editors of the anthology, The Other Latino. The Other Latino is subtitled Writing Against a Singular Identity. And I wonder if you can talk about the ways poetry and fiction are uniquely capable forms of such cultural resistance. How do they create that kind of against that you're talking about?
That's a good question. Well, I touched on this, I think, in the earlier lecture, how I was suggesting that you can talk about one thing, but really be addressing another subject to arrive at something obliquely. So I guess what I was trying to get across is that you can address issues of identity without actually using your personal narrative, because really maybe, one thing that you might be feel compelled to do is to kind of articulate something that that you're obsessed with, but it doesn't have to be articulated through, I guess, your own story, is what I'm trying to say. And the other thing is that poetry allows, what I love about poetry is it allows you to address something and in its complexity and richness. There can be paradox, contradictions, all of these things. And so it seems fitting for something like identity, which is so problematic.
I think fiction writing, I believe, for every fiction writer is very different, because I think there's many ways to be fiction writers as there are to be human beings. And when we have an expectation that there will be certain cultural tropes or images or language that will appear in story after story after story, or a certain kind of narrative that should be unfurling in fiction writing by Latina or Latino writers, I think that that just seems impossible to produce and impossible to expect. And yet we do counter some of those expectations where people don't know, is that a Latino character, or where's the poverty, where's the beans, where's the abuela, where are the things that we expect that we're going to find in these stories. And I think it is the fiction writer and the poet's job to just expand that territory that we can explore with our cultural production. That's our responsibility, I believe.
But do you think there's anything that fiction writers might do in that expansion that goes in a different direction than poetry can do? Or do you see mostly their sort of shared ability to do that work?
I think it's a shared responsibility. I think I acknowledge that fiction prose writing is very different from poetry, and again, but we do have that same task of going about the subject in an oblique way. We don't tell it directly; we tell it through a narrative that resonates where we want to go, rather than dealing with it head on.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to talk about is the relationship in this conversation is the relationship between those sort of problematic or vexed terms, narrative and lyric. And it was interesting that you both had in your readings stories within a story. Blas with your poem, "The Battle of Nashville," and of course Lorraine with the excerpt from your novel. And maybe you can talk about the ways in which poems or stories handle that kind of layering, that kind of building of narratives within narratives differently, or how they might have some shared connection.
I love poems that take a turn in that way. I sometimes think as my model of the poem by Rilke, "Washing the Corpse," and in that poem, it describes two women washing the corpse, and they hear like a cough come from it, and you wonder, where can a poet go from that? What do you do next? And maybe some poets would end there, but he takes the camera and moves it, the lens of the camera, and moves it against the wall, and that seems like such a dramatic shift. And he starts to describe the shadows as kind of being caught in nets. And so I kind of think of that as my model, and so when I get stuck and I feel like I don't want to, become complacent, right? And I think, okay, you can shift as wildly as you need to. And so a poem might have 4 stories, or, like in the Battle of Nashville, I'm talking about the civil rights movement in Nashville, I'm talking about the Civil War, I'm talking about a love relationship, between 2 men. But hopefully, they're somehow resonating or speaking to one another, and kind of adding a kind of depth to the kind of themes that I'm trying to raise that I couldn't do with just the one story. Right.
Do you think it's a kind of lyricizing of the notion of narrative, that by having stories upon stories, it makes you aware of that kind of the swerve that you're talking about, the possibility of opening things up?
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that one thing I'm conscious of is when I'm writing this kind of poem, I don't want to appear like I'm some brave, courageous person for being in a relationship. So but I do want to kind of honor that we're doing this thing. We have this relationship that isn't necessarily embraced by a large, a lot of members of the community, and so a way to do that. So, for example, one thing is to make this comparison, kind of sheepishly, with the civil rights movement. You see, which was in fact, really standing in the face of this oppression and kind of possible violence. But instead, I can say, oh, we make the coffee and take the trash out. That's all we're doing. But really, there is this kind of maybe some hostility there. So those layers can kind of allow the story to resonate, but then also kind of suggest something without running into the problem of seeming kind of self-important or dramatizing what's really happening. I don't want to. It's not like people are coming on our doorstep and threatening us. So but there is that kind of tension, and so it's a way to convey that without, seeming self-important or being melodramatic.
Right, no, that makes sense. Obviously, Lorraine, the story within a story in the section of your novel operates in a very different way, and has a different tone altogether from the poem
Yes.
we talked about. But I thought, it'd be interesting to talk about the two in comparison to each other.
As a fiction writer, I think my obsession and my interest is dialogue. I love dialogue. I feel that I have to kind of swim through the summary to get to scene, and then I can relax. And scene's like an island I can pull myself on and just relax and let the characters take over. And that's a lot of fun for me. But in this particular excerpt that I read, I included a story within the dialogue, which is something you really shouldn't do. You shouldn't use dialogue to work in an expository way. However, it was also a means to broker power between the two women. There was the principal who had the knowledge and had the power, and of course had the authority just because of her professional status. And then Marina, who's kind of beholden to that, and the power brokering that went on was rather one-sided, but the story facilitated that power brokering, so I thought I could get away with it.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I did or not, but I hope I did.
No, definitely. Well, and it might be worth also looking at your writing from the opposite perspective in terms of lyricism and narrative. There were many moments, truly, you read a lot of dialogue in the selection this evening, but there were truly moments of musicality in your description. Do you think a lot about how that might work and what that might do in fiction in a way that musicality and poetry?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think there's much in common with fiction writing and verse writing, poetry writing. I do read my work aloud and I listen for the sound of it, and I want it to sound right. I want it to flow in a way that I like it to flow, and it's, yeah, absolutely, I am interested in the sound of what I write.
Yeah. And do you think about that differently in moments when you're writing descriptive writing as opposed to actual dialogue?
No, maybe I'm lying, because I think it's even more important when I'm writing dialogue that it sound right.
Oh, interesting. You know what, and actually, why don't you do this? Why don't you point the mic away from me, because I'm worried that it's picking up. Is that what it is? I'll take mine off. Okay. This is better. Okay. Sorry. Are there poets and fiction writers you both like? As a fiction writer, are there poets that you look to? And Blas, as a poet, are there fiction writers you're excited about?
Well, I really am excited by Lorraine's work.
Same here.
I'm so desperate to be humorous in my poetry, and I just can't do it. I just can't, and it's like I start to write, and this dark cloud comes over, and it's just, it's so when I read her work, I'm so envious. I just think I laugh out loud when I'm reading it to myself, and when I teach her books. The students are like shaking their heads at me, like, stop, because I just stop and laugh and, ask them why they aren't laughing, of course, because they haven't read it. But, so I really admire that tone that she sets. She's so good at it, but it doesn't feel like there isn't something on the line, there's always something underneath that seems really important too. It's not slapstick humor.
Same here. I really, I think you're the only poet we've invited to read at Vanderbilt twice, ever, and nobody objected. Everybody was yes, let's bring Blas back. And what I admire is just the elegant, streamlined quality to your line. It's just so restrained, and yet and there's such an enormous tension with the emotion in the face of that restraint, and I don't know how you do it. I tend to write things to death, and I would just love to be able to pull back, pare back, be very incisive and clean and spare and powerful, the way you are.
I'm wondering, does anyone out there have any questions? And if you do, we have a mic for you to speak into, so just, raise your hand.
Oh, I was actually blocking out the light when I turned around. But I do have a question for Blas. And it was the short poem that you read where it related to your partner's father passing away. And it seemed that you were kind of taking his perspective and then sort of describing how that felt. But I wondered if you were drawing more on what you observed in him or your own experience, because it was kind of an interesting perspective.
Thanks. It's a great question. I always struggle trying to decide what to read because in both books there is a kind of narrative arc. You know, I'm just writing for some years and then all of a sudden I start to see an arc, and so I always feel like I have to read the kind of narrative poems that kind of establish the context. It's, you know, it's harder to read the lyric poems, but I did read that one, and I think that I often take the lyric poem as an opportunity to explore like someone else's perspective. So in the book, there are these companion poems, and they both address what it's like before the adoption is finalized and the kind of fear and tension that exists, you know, in the adopting parents. And I tried to imagine what it might be like for the birth mother as well. And it kind of just helped me to be more understanding if, you know, she kind of disappeared or, you know what I mean, you understand? And so I find it just to be a useful to get a fuller picture of the context to kind of examine and maybe other people's perspectives. So I try and do that in the more lyric poems.
I'm wondering if each of you can speak a bit about what the role, if any, research has in your work. For example, Blas, your poem, The Given Account, which is set in the 16th century, and Lorraine, in any of your books that require knowledge or expertise of a particular area, was there research involved? So what role does research play in your work?
Well, with my first novel, the Gifted Gavaldon Sisters, that spanned, I think, over a century in time. So I really had to investigate the time period. I had to investigate the Pueblo Indians. I had to investigate the Hopi, in particular Hopi Indians, and their pattern, their habits and customs and so forth, and weave that in. And the interchapters contain some myths, some Native American myths, so I had to investigate those as well. And it was tremendously interesting. But like revision, I think research is a practice that's more dreaded than dreadful. And I know I really had to push myself to do it. And when we lived in Georgia, we had a little bird that would come to the window, and it was a research bird. It would say, research, research, research. So it reminded me that I had to get busy with my research. And I listened to that bird. And so that the result was that. But practically everything that I write, I do have to do some kind of research. I do have to do, and that research takes you in interesting places and takes the work in interesting places that you might not have expected to go. So it's a practice of discovery, I think, for me, to do research. How does that work for you?
I don't usually do a ton of research, but if I'm reading something that I find compelling, I might just explore it more thoroughly. So the story of from the Given Account of Diego Salcedo, I just thought that was interesting, and this kind of relates to Lewis's question. I just wanted to know why would they do this? Why would they kill this Spaniard who they didn't? He wasn't the cruelest. They just wanted to see if they could be killed. To determine whether or not they should rebel. And so it's completely fictionalized, but I did kind of try and understand the tension that existed between the two groups. Other times, like just something appeals to me that I hear or read. There's a poem, Hubble's Law. So I heard about that, and I did some research and used that as a kind of metaphor just something resonates. You know, why does something become a poem? Who knows why? But something just strikes me as compelling, and then I'll just do some research, and sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. But I don't kind of set out, you know, do the research and then write the poem. Usually, something just appeals to me, and I'm writing, and then I'll do more research, and then I'll kind of go back and forth between the poem and research.
I'm not quite sure how to word this question, so I hope you bear with me. But I'm just wondering, when you're looking at literature about a certain culture, so Latino culture, or I read much Indian American literature, what aspects about that make it Latino literature, for instance? And I know this is a long question, and and it's very broad, but is it the tension, and like perhaps a mispronunciation of a name? Is it a lack of understanding? Because some of those elements just seem like the basic elements of a good story or human nature in general. So I hope you could talk to that.
It's funny you asked that question, considering our noon discussion.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful question. I think you worded it very well too. Yes, I mean, there's Latino literature can be great literature too. I mean, it should be. I would hope that would be all our goal. If you set out to write something, you'd want it to be great, and you'd want it to work, and you wouldn't want it to just be an artifact of a culture that's exotic or admired because it creates an authentic feeling or something. I'm not quite sure how that works exactly, but in the Other Latino, our anthology, we quote William Luis, who's my colleague at Vanderbilt University, and he has a pretty handy definition of what a Latino author is, and it's a 3-part definition. I'll see if I can remember it. The first part is some connection to Latin American heritage or Spanish language. The second is inculcated in the U.S. experience, and usually writing in English, but sometimes in Spanish. And the third is self-identifying as Latino or Latina writer. Those are the only conditions that he sets forth and that we've embraced in the collection. So we would like to get away from, yes, I know it's a Latino piece because there's a piñata right there. So therefore, it passes the litmus test. And we would like to be able to say it's produced by Latino writers, and we hope it's great too.
We were just at lunch, we were talking, and it occurred to me, so I have now 2 sons, and one is biracial, and the other one is red hair and blue eyes, and I said, I thought, will they think of themselves as Latino? And we were like, we'll see what they, but they will identify as Latino or not. And, and their experience, will kind of shape the way that they, see the world, their perception. And if they chose to write, then they would be Latino authors. So, but that's kind of.
That's right. And we have an 8-year-old, my husband and I have an 8-year-old grandson who is biracial. He's African American, and he's my daughter's child, so he's half Latino too. And he is so proud about claiming his Latino heritage. That is how he sees himself, and that is what he is. He's Latino. And it works for him. He may change his mind later and decide to be something else, but for now, that works.
And do you think the great range of Latino literature reflects that kind of choice, that kind of optimism, that kind of forward-looking vision?
I do, absolutely. What do you think, Blas?
No, I agree. I think it's becoming more and more compelling, richer, really kind of challenging. A lot of Latino authors are challenging as we said earlier, expected markers, different aesthetic choices that seem to be associated with Latino literature. And these authors, I think, are challenging other Latinos to find new ways of expressing whatever it is they're trying to express. So, innovation, right?
Oh yeah, wait, hold on for a second.
Ms. Lopez,
Yes.
you spoke earlier in the afternoon session about your Sephardic antecedents, right? Has Latino ever been Ladino, and could it ever be?
I don't see why not. I really don't see why not.
Because the language isn't dead yet, but it's going through hard times.
And I'm sorry to say I don't know much about. My mother has passed away, and with her, a lot of information has gone too. But recently we discovered that on my father's side, they were also Sephardic Jews. So it was both sides. And we're kind of excited about that. It's just like waking up one morning and you're suddenly more than you were the night before. It's kind of cool.
One more question, yeah.
I have a question, and it has to do with, you both write about identity, and your narratives oftentimes involve talking about, family members or your mother or partners or people that are close to you. Is that difficult to do? And are you always thinking of when that person reads that, what are they going to think? Is that really hard, or is it fun? I don't know.
Clearly, I don't think about this as often as I should. Or I would not have written, created a character, my cousin, named it for my cousin Molly, and made very many similarities, except that, and compared her to a transvestite. And that was bad. That was bad to do. But she has forgiven me now, and so that's good. My other cousin Geraldine, however, has not spoken to me in I don't know how many years, and I don't blame her. I wouldn't speak to me either.
What'd you compare Geraldine to, or define her as?
No, I just, she was, well, I did a terrible thing. She confided in me a lot about her family and so forth, and I thought, this would make an interesting story. And Geraldine did not share that feeling. So, but she's, I'm good with her not talking to me. I'm angry at me too, and so and I don't think about. I think in some way or another, I think that my stories are just for me, and though weirdly, almost like in a dissociative way, I try to get them published, and then they get published, and then I start, oh no, what have I done? What have I done? But I've learned to at least change names, and it varies, because I have some family members who are horrified by what I do, and others are horrified that I've not done it to them. So, you can't please people. You can't. What's your experience been?
I was saying this earlier, that my family and I have had this kind of unsaid rule that they would never read my work, it was great. It worked out really wonderfully. But I gave a reading at the University of Maryland last year, and they all filed in. And I thought, oh no, what am I gonna do? And I did read a definition of terms, and I thought, I just can't back out now. It's like I have this reading list. And so they don't talk about it, I don't talk about it, we just kind of pretend it didn't happen, and so.
Well, on that note, I hope you do feel like this is a reading you can talk about to other people. If you want to keep on reading works by our authors tonight, they have books for sale outside. Also, their anthology, The Other Latino, is for sale, Other Latino. I'm sure they'd be happy to sign copies of both their own work and the anthology. And you can find out more about our readings and sign up to come to more later on. Thanks so much for coming out. We really appreciate it.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.